Hello, this is the class which is going to end our sequence about political satire. So this class is about Orwell and his time, and it's a way to link our sequence to the theme, the writer and his time. So the first question was about what revolution did Orwell portray in his book Animal Farm. So the revolution that is portraying and referring to in his book is the Russian Revolution, which took place in 1917. And he wanted to create a parallel and to draw a parallel between the revolution in Animal Farm in the book, the fictional revolution, draw a parallel with this fictional revolution, and the real revolution which occurred in Russia in 1917. And by doing this, he wanted to denounce how a popular revolution can turn its back on its own ideals and principle. And indeed, the Russian Revolution ended, so the Bolshevik Revolution ended and resulted in a government which was even more oppressive, even more cruel, violent, and deadly than the government that they had, or the regime that they had overthrown. So that's why he wants to point out the uselessness of this revolution and other revolutions. So if we draw parallels between the real characters of the revolution and the fictional characters in the book, we can start by Mr. Jones. So Mr. Jones is compared to Tsar Nicholas II. Indeed, under his reign, the people's situation worsened, and they suffered even more from poverty and from want. So then we can compare Old Major, so the old pig that we saw at the beginning of the book, in chapter 1, the one who urges the animals to riot, to rebel, and the one who is at the origin of this rebellion. So Old Major is compared to Lenin. Lenin was inspired by Karl Marx and the theory of communism, because according to him, he thought that if workers united, they then could rebel against the economic oppressor, and they could create and trigger more prosperity for the nation. So Old Major is compared to Lenin, inspired by Karl Marx. Then you've got Snowball, so one of the pig who led the real rebellion against Mr. Jones. So Snowball is compared to Leon Trotsky, who was an ally to Lenin, and who led the Red Army of Lenin as in the book. But Trotsky was exiled and chased, we'll see, by Stalin a bit later, and some of his men were even killed by Lenin's police. And it's the same in the book, because Snowball was chased and expelled from the farm by Napoleon. So finally, Napoleon. So Napoleon is compared to Stalin and is modeled on Stalin. Stalin valued power for its own sake, and he wanted absolute and complete power. He indeed committed lots of acts of brutality, terror, violence, as Napoleon does in the book. And we saw that Napoleon had dogs, and that the dogs of Napoleon were creating fear among the animals, and this fear prevented the animals from rebellion. And so it was the same situation at the time of Stalin, because I think you know about Stalin's KGB, and this is a secret police. So Napoleon and Stalin worked in the same way. They wanted to present themselves as a perfect idealist working for the nation, but actually they used propaganda and manipulation to appear like this, but behind they worked only for their own interest. So this is it for the first question. Then, so this is the context and the real intention of George Orwell at the time when he wrote the book. But as we're going to see, his book can be used to refer to other situations in our modern society and to other issues. So what he denounces is obviously the idea of power, and how power corrupts people, and how absolute power corrupts absolutely different people. So he wants to denounce the fact that popular revolution can be dangerous, and he wants to focus on dictatorship and on all the authoritarian regimes where the oppressor is using absolute power to manipulate, to control, to lure the people who are oppressed. He wants to denounce that in these regimes, people or the citizens are totally deprived of their civil rights, and the citizens are also denied their human rights. So people are living in fear, and they are manipulated through lies, propaganda, and they are never told the truth. So by extension, George Orwell wants to denounce selfish and shrewd politicians who serve their own interest. Now, question 3. Why did Orwell decide to write a fairy instead of a political essay? So you can see that as a subtitle, you've got the idea of a fairy story. So first we need to find or to identify the different characteristics which are common to the fairy story, fairy tale, and to this book. So in terms of plot, this is a flat plot, very simply, where the action are really simplified, and where the pattern is circular. Usually you've got an exposition, complication, if you remember your classes of last year. So exposition, complication, rising action, climax, and then falling action, and resolution, which is a back to the beginning, but with a plus. So here you've got this circular pattern, but what is different between a fairy tale and this book is that there is no moral at the end, and there is no plus. It means that the animal didn't learn anything, but you've got this circular pattern and this flat plot. Moreover, in terms of characters, you've got stereotypical characters who are easily identified and who can easily be classified in the category villains or goodies. And finally, not finally, but you also have this magical dimension that you can find in fairy stories, because you've got a personification of the animals who become in a way humans by speaking and having a brain, etc. And so, why did he use why did he want to write a fairy story? So we have already seen this, but it's a way to send a universal message. We're going to see that this universal message is also timeless, because we can reinterpret his message and adapt it to our context. It's also easy to understand. It was also a way to avoid censorship, and especially at his time, because publisher didn't really want to publish his book at the beginning. And it's a way to generalize, to be able to take distance from our society, to be able to criticize without without a direct attack. So why is this book still modern? So we can, as we live in democracies, we might forget that there are still two dictatorships and two established dictatorships in the world, and totalitarian regime. So you might think of North Korea. So in these countries, opposition and rebellions are totally prohibited. You've got the use of propaganda, manipulation of the media. The individual freedoms are restricted and restrained, and there's a high degree of control of public and private life. But even if we don't think of totalitarian regime, we can also think of some popular revolution which were failures. So, for example, we can the example of the Arab Spring and Egypt, because so in Egypt you had an uprising of the people in 2011, and it did turn into a democracy. But then you had two leaders. So one was called Mohamed Morsi, and he was unseated and replaced by another leader, LCC, who used violence and brutality to repress the former leader. And if we take a look and compare the leader of Egypt after the revolution and the leader of Egypt, so Mubarak, before the revolution, some politicians tend to think that there is no great difference between the two, as in the book, at the end of the book, where you don't see any differences between the pigs and the animals. So even if we don't speak about totalitarian regime or revolution, we can also think of all the scandals in politics, all the scandals which occur in our country, in the Western world, and scandals about the misuse of. So sorry, I forgot. So this is a title, title of an article in North Korea, so where Animal Farm still appeals to us in 2019. So as we said, because North Korea is the totalitarian regime. And as we were talking about the different scandals in Western countries, because of the misuse of funds, because of the manipulation of language, the abuse of power. And here you've got the example of Trump and all the manipulation of language, media, and fake news that is setting to serve his own interest. We can also think about South Africa. So after Mandela, because the ANC, the political party, after Mandela was or is still and is corrupted, and because the elite of this party, which is composed mainly of black citizens, so this elite is taking advantage of the power that they have to serve their own economic interest, and in a way forget the needs of the people. So here in this case we've got the misuse of economic resources. So here you've got different examples that proves that Animal Farm is still relevant today, and unfortunately will be relevant in the future. So if we conclude about George Orwell, what type of writer was he? So he was obviously a committed writer who wanted to send a message, and he wants to act against injustice. That's what he says in this quote and in the extract from Why I Write. We can also say that he was in a way visionary, or at least he was very aware of the real, or he was aware and clearly understands the real nature of man,